everybody. Welcome to our small group today. Welcome Roots Groups. Glad that we get to do this together today. And I really loved Brian's last week, and I'm going to be talking about that a little bit.
It was really good.
It was really good. You did awesome. You did great.
Thank you.
So we're continuing on in chapter 15 of John, and we're going to be starting at verse 9. But before I read the scriptures, when I was reading this, it actually reminded me of time travel movies, and it did, and I love time travel movies because it messes with my mind so much. Like, they go back in the past, right, and they change something, and then that changes the things in the future that change, but then for some reason it all ends up the same, and they're like in this loop, right? It just loops back, and you're like, wait a minute, it's like because they changed the thing in the past, they made the exact same thing happen in the future, and you're just like, it's just weird, right? Yeah. Right? Yeah. And this is what happens, right? And so anyways, as I was reading these scriptures, I kind of felt like it made a big circle, just like those time movies make a big circle. That's how it felt. So as I read these, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Okay, so John 15, starting in verse 9, says, I have loved you even as the Father has loved me. Remain in my love. When you obey my commandments, you remain in my love, just as I obey my Father's commandments and remain in his love. I have told you these things so that you will be filled with my joy. Yes, your joy will overflow. So, like Brian was saying last week, we're connected to each other through Jesus, right? So last week he talked about, it was the analogy of the grapevine. He's the vine and we're the branches, and Jesus supports the branches. Right? We don't support ourselves. Jesus supports each of us and then all of us. So we're one with him, and the connection is so complete that we cannot say that one is not part of the other. We're all connected. So I think last week was more about how we're connected to Jesus, and this week in this section is how, because we're connected to Jesus, we're all connected to each other. Okay, so that's this next part. So so here, Jesus tells us to remain in his love. Okay, so think about that. To be a branch that remains on the vine. And he tells us how to do that, how to stay connected, right? So verse 10, stay connected, then he says how. So verse 10, he says, when you obey my commandments, you remain in my love, just as I obey my Father's commandments and remain in his love. So Jesus is telling us to do what he does. That we need to obey his commandments the way he obeys our Heavenly Father's commandments. Then he says, I told you these things so that you will be filled with my joy. Yes, your joy will overflow. So what makes our joy overflow? He told us by obeying his commands, right? So when we obey his commands, we stay connected to him, and our joy will overflow. And this is cool because he says it will overflow, not it might overflow or anything, but it becomes a spiritual law at that point, right? So a physical law, right, what goes up must come down, right? But there's also spiritual laws, and this one is, if you obey my commands, you will remain in me, and your joy will overflow. So there you know, like if your joy is overflowing, then you're remaining in him. Your joy, and that means that you are obeying his commands. Okay, so that's great, but then we have to say, okay, so we want to obey his commands so that we can say that this is true about us, right? That our joy is overflowing. All this is great because we're obeying his commands. So then the next sentence, he tells us the command that he wants us to obey.
That's good. Okay,
so in this command, if we keep this one command, if we obey this command, by default we'll be keeping all the rest of the commands. So he says, this is my command. He only gives us one. Verse 12, he says, this is my commandment. Love each other in the same way I have loved you. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. Okay, so that sounds like okay, so now this is the command, right? To love each other the same way that he's loved us. And I just think that it would be way easier if instead he'd given us this list, right? And this is what we tend to do, right? It's like, well, I go to church, I read my Bible every day, I'm giving, I'm doing all these things. And so we'd like this nice list of, I do these things, so therefore I am connected to Jesus. But that's not what he says, right? He doesn't mention any of that. He says, love each other the way I love you, right? And we don't really have the ability to do it on our own. And this comes back to like what you were saying last week, Brian. Right? That it's all Jesus, right?
Yes.
When I stay connected to him,
Yeah.
then he's the one that does it, right? Okay, so here's the thing about like, so he tells us this is what we have to do, we have to love. And he doesn't even leave that part subjective, right? Where I get to decide what is love for my neighbor or my, my friends or whatever, or how much love I give or what it looks like. No, he tells us what it is. He says exactly what it is. In verse 13, he says, there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. So he tells me I need to love others the way that he loves me. And then how does he say he loves me? That I have to be willing to lay down my life for my friends, right? Jesus actually did that for us, even physically. But here he's saying that our lives aren't to be about ourselves, but for each other, right? That's what it is. So what is giving my life for my friends? What is life? I think it's the days and the hours and the minutes that we spend here on earth, right? So giving my life to my friends would be giving time, right? Energy, help, compassion, encouragement, comfort, right? These would be laying down my life for my friends. And this is impossible really if we aren't connected to the vine, right? So Jesus has given us an impossibility on our own, but connected to him, then we can do it, right?
That's good.
And John says, God is love, and all who live in love live in God, and God lives in them. And as we live in God, our love grows more perfect. And that's 1 John 4:16. And I think it's kind of cool because John's the one that records Jesus' words here. And then this is from his first letter to the churches, right, that he writes. It's like he grasped it. Jesus said this thing, and, how much time did he spend thinking about that, And so then he writes 1 John, and it's all about that, that I would recommend as some reading this week because it's a short little book, but man, is it just packed. And and that's really what he's doing, is unpacking this, what Jesus says about love and how we're part of that. So Jesus creates the fruit of love in us because we are connected to him. And then love flows from him and into and through us, right? Like the lifeblood that comes from the vine goes out to the branches to produce the branches. The branch doesn't really do anything all its own, right? It's that lifeblood that goes through it, and it's Jesus' lifeblood that goes through us to others, right? So in this case, the fruit is love. That's what this passage is about. The greatest of all the fruit of the Holy Spirit who lives in us because we are connected to Jesus. We don't create it ourselves. It is his lifeblood that makes the fruit and creates love in us, which is really great news for us because this takes us back to the beginning. Here we are in the big circle thing, right, that Jesus told us to do, to remain in him, right? So our obedience to do what Jesus said is to remain in him So our obedience to meet the command of loving each other is fulfilled by us remaining in him. So we made our big circle, we remain in him so that we can love, and then we obey by loving each other, and that keeps us remaining in him. So we just made this big old circle. And the love actually comes from him. So we can't even truly love if we're disconnected from him. If we're disconnected from him, it's not really love, it's really something for ourselves. Mm-hmm. It's something to make us feel good about ourselves. Yeah. It's false, it's not true, it's self-centered. It's really what can I receive, what can this person do for me, what is good for me. It becomes all about that rather than actually others and outward oriented, But through Jesus, through his love that flows through us, then we genuinely care about each other and we want the best for others, and we're able to say, I lay down my life right? We're able to do that. And the daily living becomes others focused instead of about ourselves. Okay, so the next verse, Jesus says, this is verse 15. He says, I no longer call you slaves because a master doesn't confide in slaves. Now you are my friends, since I have told you everything the Father told me. Since Jesus is on the subject of laying down his life for his friends, he makes sure to let the disciples and us know that we are his friends. He's not talking about some other group of people or angels or entities. He's talking to us about us, right? He's saying, you are my friends. And it's cool because he says the way that we can know this for sure is that he's confiding in us, letting us know everything that the Heavenly Father has told him. And we know that. So it's like, oh, we're really his friends because he told us what God said, you know.
Right.
So we're part of it, you know, we're part of that. We're part of the beautiful vine. And then Jesus tells us the purpose of being connected to the vine. And if you haven't figured it out yet, it's to love. That's it. It's to love. To love God and to love each other. And love is really the litmus test to know if you're connected to Jesus, if you're connected to that vine. So John, back in 1 John again, as he's unpacking all of this because it's his discovery too, he says, we know what real love is because Jesus gave up his life for us. So we also ought to give up our lives for our brothers and sisters. And then I just want to end with that, and that I think reading 1 John, you know, which I already mentioned, but I think that would be kind of a cool thing to do for homework this week, maybe if you're up to it, you know, just reading through that and just speaking to God and letting him just speak to your heart about that.